Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. This is Reading with Your Kids. We're beaming out to you and the entire planet from the beautiful, book-loving neighborhood of Reedville, the loveliest neighborhood in all of Boston. I'm so excited that you're joining us because I believe that real magic happens when we share stories together. When a child sits down with a parent, grandparent, or teacher and opens a book, hearts connect, imaginations grow, and love shines brighter. Today we're going to meet two incredible authors who've created stories that are sure to spark laughter, curiosity, and kindness. Help us spread the word about Reading with Your Kids by telling all of your family and friends about the show and letting them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network. And they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, Amazon Music, Audible, CastBox, Player FM. Wherever you find your favorite shows, you can find Reading with Your Kids. Can't wait for you to meet our guest today. First up, Linda Ravin Lodding is here to celebrate her new picture book, It Started with a Book Band. Later in the show, Matthew Lux is here to celebrate his middle grade graphic novel, My Journey to Japan, Escape to Yokai Mountain. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by the Fred the Snake series, written by Dr. Peter Cotton. I just got back from the COSPA National Education Conference. 1,500 school leaders from across the country. And I have to tell you, one of the biggest smiles at our booth came from a little snake named Fred. We were sharing the Fred the Snake book series, and again, superintendents and educators were drawn in by the bright, colorful illustrations. They'd pick up a book, start flipping through it, and you could just see it. They got it. These are the kinds of stories kids want to read. But you know what really stopped them in their tracks? When I told them that the author, Dr. Peter Cotton, was a world-renowned gastroenterologist and teacher before he began writing children's books. And suddenly it clicked. Here's someone who spent a lifetime helping people, now using the same care, the same curiosity to create stories that help kids feel brave, welcome, and excited to learn. The Fred the Snake series now includes 10 wonderful adventures, from getting mended to going to school to exploring cities and beaches with friends, and every one of them is filled with heart, humor, and connection. We loved having Dr. Peter on Reading with Your Kids, and I can tell you, educators at the COSPA conference love Fred the Snake just as much as we do. So if you're looking for stories your kids will laugh with, learn from, and want to read again and again, meet Fred the Snake. Because with Fred the Snake, the real magic happens when we choose kindness and become a friend. This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Follow the River by Ellen Cochran. What would you do if you fell from the sky into the Amazon rainforest? That's not fiction. That's the incredible story behind the book Follow the River by Ellen Cochran. On Christmas Eve 1971, 17-year-old Julianne boarded a plane with her mom in Lima, Peru. The destination was home, a research station deep in the Amazon jungle. But just 20 minutes after landing, disaster struck. Lightning hit the plane, and Julianne was thrown 2 miles through the sky into the rainforest below. When she woke up the next day, she was alone. Her collarbone was broken. Her glasses were gone. She only had one shoe, and she was surrounded by one of the most dangerous jungles on Earth. But Julianne remembered the lessons her scientist parents had taught her and began an unbelievable journey through the Amazon. For 11 days, she walked, survived, and followed the water until she found help. Follow the River is a breathtaking story of courage, resilience, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. If your family loves stories like Hatchet or I Survived, this is one adventure you won't want to miss. Discover Follow the River today, a true story that proves that sometimes the greatest survival tool is hope. I am so fancy. Joining us right now from Stockholm in Sweden, our guest is here today to celebrate her new picture book. It's called It Started with a Book Band. Please welcome to the show, Linda Ravin Lodding. Wow, I just lost the ability to speak in English or any language. Linda, I am so sorry. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids.
Well, thank you. We could take it in Swedish if you wanted to, but I think we'll stick with English for right now. And you did a fantastic job.
Okay, so I was trying it in Swedish. That
was that. But I just also want to thank you, Jed, for what you do for the reading and writing community and for bringing families together around reading. It's really so important. So thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you very much. That's very, very kind of you. I launched the show 9 years ago. We just celebrated our 9th anniversary.
Wow. Happy
Valentine's
anniversary.
Day. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic.
I knew I had these experts telling me I should do this podcast and that podcast. And, I said a little prayer and I was reminded of the fact that I am very close to my now adult kids. And I know that those relationships were built on a foundation of reading together. And it led to cooking together and throwing the ball around together. And, my daughter would come out on tour with me and we'd be in a 16-year-old young woman would choose to be with her dad in a van for 3 weeks at a time. And we would talk about books and everything. And it's all started with reading together. So that's what I'm hoping. And I was blown away. You probably know this, but I thought, you read together. Hey, the kids get a little bit comfortable with reading, but I had no idea of all the other benefits that kids get when their parents read to them 20 minutes a night.
It's amazing. It's not just about literacy. It's also about building relationships, right? And sometimes intergeneral relationships. And that's one of the things I love about picture books because it's actually it's a performative medium in a way. You have an adult reading with the child, connecting with the child, asking questions, stopping and pausing and looking at those pictures and going in deeper and asking questions. It's a real beautiful exchange and an exchange of words, of thoughts, ideas, of pictures. And that's why I love picture books and have a similar relationship to you too. I was read to a lot as a young one, read to my daughter as well. And that kind of is the basis of our beautiful relationship today. And she is at the age of 27, she's a very avid reader now too. And I would hope to think maybe I had something to do with that.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. And I love that you reminded us that that reading with our kids is performative. That we're not supposed to sit there, read the book like this. You got to get the characters. I'm sitting and reading in a monotone is also beneficial. But boy, when you get into the characters and the voices and you're stopping and starting and asking those questions, I think, Linda, that when you ask a kid a question, when the most important person in a kid's life says, "What do you think?"
Exactly.
How empowering is that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it also teaches causality because then you say, what do you think is going to happen next? And then you do the page turn and then you have that reveal. But it starts kids thinking about causality. I guess it brings up even the topic of why this book that I just wrote is so important. Yeah. It started with the book ban because that's what this is about. It's about some people making decisions to take books away from kids who need those books. And that's why I just think it's so important that we fight to keep books on the shelves and to give all kids access to the books that they need. For some kids, books are a mirror to themselves. And for some kids, books are a window into other worlds. And, we have to offer them both. Yeah. So that was the basis of it started with the book ban.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, Jed, this book came about a little bit differently than my other books have come about. Usually, I think like most authors, it starts with the germ of an idea or something overheard or a little tidbit of inspiration. But in fact, this book idea was pitched to me by my now editor, Josh Gregory at Albert Whitman. I had done a book with him that came out last year called When We Had to Leave Home, which was inspired by the Ukraine-Russian war, and it followed a young refugee child as her and her grandmother and her mother fled, and it was about finding home. And yeah, again, it was a tough topic to approach, but it was intended to share experiences that some children are facing, and let other children in on those other experiences. But then Josh said to me, I've got this idea. I really want to do something about book banning. I don't know. Would you be interested in thinking about the topic and maybe pitching to me a couple of ideas? And I thought, wow, first of all, really brave that they want to do something on this topic. So kudos to them for coming and saying, I want to do something. We need to do something on our list, and we have to bring forward a book on this topic. And then I'm so appreciative that he challenged me with that idea, because I love a good challenge, a good writing challenge. And then I said, yeah, sure, I can think of something. And then I hung up the phone and thought, how am I going to do this topic for picture book audience, which is normally ages 4 to 8, right? This is a topic that adults are having a hard time grappling with. How do I take this topic and bring it through a child's lens, and not make it something scary, but make it a conversation and inviting kids into the conversation and letting them think about things like choice and fairness. So I pitched a couple of ideas to Josh. There was one that was particularly making me excited. It made him excited. And this is the book that we have now put out, called It Started with the Book Ban.
So let's talk about it. I'm imagining that in this story, there's a book that gets banned.
Well, you are absolutely right. That's how it started.
That's what 9 years of doing this podcast gives me, my superpower.
You got it. But then, so yes, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about it. It does start with the book ban. It starts on a Monday, in fact, when Edwin, our hero, marches into the library for Library Day and sees that his favorite book on space is missing. But then this incites a whole lot of other bans starting to happen in their village. One thing bans another thing. Even joyous things begin to get banned. The color green is banned. Bird song is banned. Even the letter S is banned, which you can imagine his friend Sophie was not so happy about, because now the letter S has been banned. All of these things start to get banned, and it becomes ludicrous and humorous and wacky and just absurd. So Edwin is like the only one, and his friends, that begin to notice the absurdity of the situation. And so they decide to take the world back. Because of course what happens is, as one thing gets banned after another, their world gets smaller and smaller and darker and darker and darker. And they decide to speak up and take their world back. One of the things that was so important to me in this storyline were also the visuals, because I saw actually, the opening visuals being, bright and cheerful with bird song and colors and, just a happy town. And then, of course, as things increasingly got banned, the palette that the illustrator was working with just gets duller and darker and darker. So the moodiness that comes through in the illustrations showcases, or basically illustrates, the moodiness of the town. And so it just became a beautiful way of showing what happens when people start to randomly ban things that others find joy in and appreciation in, and what happens to our world and our worldview. So it does it both on a very large meta scale, but also on a very personal scale for young children. At least that's my hope.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, you know, when you mentioned colors getting banned, I actually experienced that.
Did you?
I did about 20 years ago. I was in a very affluent school district. I performed educational magic shows. That was my job for 35, 40 years. And I was in a very affluent public school district in northern New Jersey, so a very liberal area of the world. And I went in and was shocked to find, because I had my costume at the time had a lot of blue and green in it, and it just happened to be December. And I was told that I couldn't wear those colors in combination in December.
Why was that?
It was related to Christmas, and we didn't want to promote one religion over the other.
Oh, my goodness.
And in the same district, you couldn't wear blue and white together because of a connection with Israel. And I'm like, okay, this is not going to be a fun series of shows.
Unbelievable when we take meaning so far that it becomes actually ludicrous.
Well, yes. And I think that's the point where, you know, I think there are a lot of, it's certainly fine to discuss, I think this book is appropriate for my kid, or I don't think it's appropriate, whatever. But when you we've had authors on, an author on their book was banned because in a 2-page spread, there was an image that was maybe a 1/4 inch tall. It was just a neighborhood. So dog was walking through the neighborhood, and there's all these houses, and one house had a rainbow on the mailbox. Ban the book.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Dr. Rajani Laraka, who's been on the show a lot, wrote a book about the heart. And for some reason, a school district banned that picture book about the heart.
Yeah. You know, it's not about banning the books. It's about being afraid to have the conversations.
Right. Yeah. And that's,
you know,
we're talking about conversations and why reading books is such a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Why are we afraid to talk?
Yeah. We have to have those conversations. Absolutely. And that's what picture books allow. They're a safe place to have those conversations. And for many families, they're the door opener to conversations. And as I said before, and very often it's the only place a child will see their identity being reflected in a positive environment, or it'll be a window onto a world that children are not aware of. So yeah, it's a sad state of affairs that we live in these days when these decisions are being made, not by families, but by politicians.
Tommy, I'm curious. We shared before we started recording that you grew up in the States, but now you've been living in Europe now for, I think you said 20, 30 years.
Yes. Yes.
I find it fascinating. First off, I was amazed when I went to the International Children's Book Festival in Bologna, Italy.
Oh, isn't that amazing place? I love going there.
Unbelievable. The city of Bologna is phenomenal. It's a beautiful place. But the book fair, the kidlit industry is so huge.
It's huge. Yes.
And it's varied. We've had we had a wonderful intern, created a series of episodes in Spanish talking to authors and publishers from South and Central America. And we learned that the books that are published specifically for those audiences are a lot different than the books that are published for an American audience. I'm curious, books published in Europe for kids, do they differ a lot from the books that we see published here in the States?
I would say so. So first of all, Sweden has a very rich children's literary tradition. We're the home of Astrid Lindgren, who wrote all the Pippi Longstocking books. And there's an Astrid Lindgren Memorial Prize, Children's Literature Prize in her honor. And as a matter of fact, I just toured her apartment last year. She lived very close to where I live, and it's an amazing place because it's her apartment as if she was just walked out the door. The typewriter is still there. The books are still open that gave her inspiration. And she was really a national treasure for Sweden. But there were also other, like Elsa Beskow, which were very traditional children's book authors here. So Sweden has a very strong literary tradition. Because of that, they tend to certainly promote Swedish authors, which they should. They go deep on certain authors, which means that you're not going to get the widest variety in the bookstores and in the libraries of non-Swedish authors. What I find so fascinating when I go to Bologna is the illustration styles also tend to really differ. So here in Sweden, there is it's going to be hard for me to explain, but the characters are drawn not in necessarily the most warm, inviting way. They're really a little bit more wiry in their characterization, a little bit more comical, which I think it just gives the books a different style. The picture books tend to be longer. They tend to go into a lot of very contemporary family situations. It's not unusual to see, families portrayed with, two mothers, two fathers. So I think they're not afraid also in contemporary literature to take on those themes and be a lot more liberal in how they showcase how we live today.
Interesting.
Yeah. But it's fascinating. I love going to Bologna and just walking down those aisles, especially, the international booths and seeing all the different picture books from different countries.
Yeah.
And I lived in the Netherlands for a while, and they also have a different, getting to know their traditions as well. Yeah. So
it's really fascinating. And what a great way, you mentioned, books being mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. What a great way to introduce your kids to different cultures. You and I were joking. I just finished interviewing an author from Ireland. Last week I was interviewing an author from Paris, France. And through books, we can take our kids on a journey to different lands. And I love the idea of reading a book that was written for a different audience. So
right.
We can really experience this is written by someone who lives here, not by someone who visited or read a book about it.
Right. Actually, I've written a couple of books that have taken place in different European cities. One of my first books was called A Gift for Mama, that takes place in Vienna because I lived in Vienna for 15 years. And it's one of these secular stories where a young boy is looking for a gift for his mother, and he starts he buys a rose because he can afford one rose. And then just as he's about to take the rose home for his mother, who should come along but Johann Strauss? And he needs the rose to help him conduct his orchestra. And then the rose goes on to Gustav Klimt. And so it introduces all of the characters, the historical characters of the turn of the century. But it all takes place in the center of Vienna where I used to live. So that was a really fun one to plot out and to think about how that would be used, or how that rose could be interpreted through the different historical characters, Empress Sissi. And so that was a lot of fun. And I wrote another book called Painting Pipette that takes place in Paris, where Josette takes her bunny to be painted in Montmartre, which is the artist quarter of Paris. And at first she runs into Chagall, and he tries to do a portrait of the bunny, but it wasn't quite right. And then Picasso comes along, but that's not quite right. And you can see it's artist after artist who attempts at capturing the essence of this bunny rabbit, but none of them get it just right. And of course, who is the most suited person to paint the portrait of her bunny? But of course, Josette herself. So again, it's fun way to bring in elements of Paris, of Vienna. I also have a book set in Kenya that I have done with a co-author because I have actually not been there. So this was a book called Flip Floppy that looks at the true story of a boat made from flip-flops that were collected on the shore of Kenya, and how they took these flip-flops and made it into a boat that eventually is going to be traveling the world. And so it was all about the environment and how a community comes together to solve a problem and make something beautiful at the same time. So I love doing just what you're saying, which is to give access through stories to, different ways that people live, it's like an armchair journey, right?
Yeah. Hey, I want to plant a seed. Someday one of these seeds is going to grow. In El Salvador, and possibly in other parts of Central America, but when I was performing in El Salvador, they make these beautiful hammocks, very, very comfortable, and they make them out of the annoying plastic shopping bags that you'd get at the supermarkets, and they're very, very colorful because they're all different colors, and they've taken it and they've recycled it into these. So maybe, well, El Salvador's.
I think you're the one to write that story, Jed.
Oh man, I got something. All right. Well, we'll see.
What are you doing after this podcast interview? You can write a children's book.
Write it. That's right. Because writing a kid's book, that's easy, right?
It only takes a couple minutes, as they all say, right?
I listened to a podcast, John Grisham.
Okay.
I'm a fan of his writing, but he was doing a podcast and he said, I read 36 books this weekend. And people are like, oh my goodness. And he goes, yeah, they're all kid books. I just read through them doing my grade. Who writes these things? So I'm like,
no. Yeah.
Show some respect.
Exactly. It's very, very hard to write 800 words and make sure that every single word is doing the right thing. So it takes years. It takes years.
Well, the right thing to do right now would be to tell everybody where they can go to find out more about It Started with a Book Ban, and also find out more about you and find out about all those great books that you've created.
Oh, well, thank you. So It Started with a Book Ban. It's coming out April 9th from Albert Whitman. And my guess is that it will be at a library or bookstore or online retailer. Please support your independent booksellers. That would make me very, very happy. And to find out more about me, I have a website, lindalodding.com, and I'm also fairly active on Instagram, Linda Ravin Lodding author. So, would love to connect with listeners or other writers. It's always a fun part of what I do. So.
Yeah. And I just noticed that It Started with a Book Ban. You can pre-order it through Linda's website, so you have to check that out.
Oh, well, thank you for remembering that. I always forget the business side of things, so thank you for that.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of It Started with a Book Ban. Our guest has been Linda Ravin Lodding. Hey, I did it in English this time, not Swedish.
You did fantastic. Thank you so much, Jed, for having me on, and I'm going to continue to be an avid listener. Thank you so much. Okay.
Hey, this episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by AspireDrinks.com. Hey, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever wanted a little extra energy, but not the kind that makes your heart race or leaves you crashing an hour later? Well, that's exactly why I want to tell you about Aspire Drinks. You'll find them at AspireDrinks.com. Aspire calls itself a healthy energy drink, and honestly, that description really fits. Instead of loading you up with sugar or extreme caffeine, Aspire delivers a gentle, steady boost with 80 milligrams of natural caffeine from green tea and guarana. That's about half the caffeine of most energy drinks, enough to help you stay focused without the jitters or the crash. It's also zero sugar, 0 calories, and 0 artificial additives, which makes it a great choice for parents, teachers, and anyone trying to make healthier choices while still getting things done. And get this, it actually tastes great, light, crisp, and lightly sparkling, with flavors like sweet cherry, raspberry acai, mango lemonade. That's what I love. No heavy aftertaste and easy on the stomach. Aspire is packed with B and C vitamins, biotin, and ginger. And it's vegan, gluten-free, keto-friendly, really designed for real life. And just for Reading with Your Kids listeners, you can get an exclusive discount of 20% off. That's the highest discount available when you shop at aspiredrinks.com and use our promo code READ. That's READ at aspiredrinks.com. Healthy energy done right. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is sponsored by Ramble Office. You know, before I tell you about Ramble Office, let me tell you about what travel used to look like for me. When I take the Reading with Your Kids studio on the road, it was like a lot. I had one box for the mixer, another case for microphones, a satchel for my laptop, cables everywhere. And I always felt like I was forgetting something. That's why Ramble Office really clicked with me. Rambo takes everything I used to juggle, tech, gear, personal stuff, and puts it into one smart, great-looking unit that's designed to be a mobile office, not just luggage. Everything has a place. Everything stays protected. And when you get to where you're going, you're ready to work. Instead of digging through bags or repacking your life every time you move, Ramble keeps your setup organized and ready to deploy. Travel days stop being chaos and start being productive. It's sleek, modern, built for people whose work doesn't stop just because they're on the move. And if your job follows you, whether that's podcasting, teaching, consulting, or creating, Ramble is worth a look. Go to rambleofficeanywhere.com, all one word, rambleofficeanywhere.com. Use the promo code READ, R-E-A-D, and receive 5% off any product. It's exclusive for Reading with Your Kids listeners. Check it out today, rambleofficeanywhere.com, promo code READ. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Connecticut. Our guest is here today to celebrate his middle grade graphic novel. It's called My Journey to Japan, Escape to Yokai Mountain. Please welcome to the show, Matthew Lux. Hey, Matthew, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Delighted to have you on. Yokai Mountain. Tell us about Yokai Mountain, please.
So this is a kid's graphic novel or a comic story that is about two twin brothers and sisters that are on their first trip to Japan with their dad. They're so excited. They've been fans of pop culture, Japanese pop culture, their whole young lives. So they're very, very excited. They're bouncing off the walls in the airplane. And it's about how on their first trip, they end up having to get stuck in the hotel for the first day because their dad has business work to do and they have to stay there, and they're very unhappy about that. But then they meet in the garden of the hotel a yokai, and what a yokai is a Japanese monster or mythical creature, and they meet a yokai who's a kid like about their age named Shimesu, who is a kappa, and a kappa is kind of like a water creature, kind of like a turtle-ish water creature in Japanese folklore. And he takes them on an adventure to a mountain filled with other yokai, where they need to get to the top. They try to, interact and meet all these different creatures and characters. It's very fun and very kind of adventurous, but also in a very silly, fun kind of way. But in between every adventure, there's a lot of topic pages about Japanese culture, and things that hopefully kids will be able to learn from. So it's kind of like a perfect combination of a fun story, but also information about Japanese culture.
Yeah. I'm going to take a wild guess and think that you maybe grew up loving anime and manga.
Yes, I did. I think I grew up inadvertently loving it because there were so many things. I grew up in the 80s, and there's so many things that I loved that I didn't even know was coming from Japan, like certain cartoons. Many of them were animated over there. But when I was like a teenager is when I discovered manga and anime, and I loved it. It was just something absolutely mind-blowingly different than what we had back then here.
Yeah, it really was. My son, who's a little younger than you, also loved anime and manga, and it can be a very immersive experience, I think, for kids. There's so much going on.
Yeah, one of the greatest things about manga and anime is that there's so many different kinds of stories. There's the kind of mainstream, powers kind of story as we often have here, but then there are stories that are more like slice of life kind of stories. There are stories about becoming a manga artist or becoming a comic artist. There's stories that are just kind of serious stories and serious movies, and that was always kind of, especially in the 90s where comics are pretty limited. It's a lot more options now for different types of comics and types of stories, but it was pretty limited when I was growing up and when I was even in high school with superhero kind of things, newspaper strip type things for kids, and only like manga and anime were around, but they weren't really, they were kind of like in one little section of comic shops. And it took a while for like now it's much easier to find. You can find them in a Barnes and Noble, which is awesome.
Yeah. What is it that that interests you so much in Japanese culture?
Well, there's a lot of things. I love culture and I love history. Japan has so much history, as like Europe does, and here in the U.S. we have history, and especially on the East Coast, which I'm grateful for. But compared to a place like Japan, there's just so much more in the history. I love learning more new things about Japanese history, the evolution of some of their cultural things. What makes a national character and a lot of things. Like, it's very interesting to me. Also, there's an appreciation for craft in Japan, and I don't want to say that as a total blanket statement, but I think there's a higher appreciation for the arts to a certain extent. But even just to taking your time to learn something or taking your time to do something really, really well, like whether it's growing a local product, like a local vegetable, or fishing a local, type of seafood, paper making. Like, they have a lot of really cool, like traditional, like crafts that I love learning about.
Yeah.
There's a lot. And I love, the history of their different religions. The Shintoism is super interesting to me because it just almost feels like an ancient religion, and it's still practiced today in Japan.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned history and how much history is in Asia and in Europe. We've hosted international kids here in our home, and I remember taking one of our students from China when she first arrived and helping her learn her way to her high school in different parts of Boston. And I remember going by a building and saying, "This is almost 400 years old." And she didn't seem all that excited. And then we went back home, and that night we were Googling facts about her city in China, and I found out there's a bridge there that's 1,200 years old. I thought, okay, she got me beat.
Yeah.
Tell me, as an author and illustrator of My Journey to Japan, Escape to Yokai Mountain, give us an idea of how long it takes, because there's hundreds of illustrations that you need to complete.
Definitely. It varies on the book, of course. I've done a bunch of other books in the past. This one it's for the page count is a nice amount, not like a crazy. It's a nice amount. It's not like a multi-100 page book, which I've done, but it's still a lot of work, as you're saying. The process is for this one is a little bit different because the publisher approached me and asked if I was interested in this sort of a project, and I was like, yes, definitely. My wife and I have traveled to Japan many times, like probably over 10 times at this point. We have a lot of friends over there, and I feel like I have a good knowledge of this subject matter. And then they kind of told me like the constraints, the format that they were looking for. So they still wanted to have a fun narrative, a fun story, but also these topic pages. So I kind of immediately, even before we signed anything, I just had this idea, and I'm like, I feel like I need to make this happen if possible. And just having the framework of the adventures with different yokai, I know kids love monsters. I'm a teacher, also an art teacher. And one of my favorite projects is when we create monsters. So it's fun to incorporate that and kind of my take on these monsters. Some of them are pretty well known, at least for people, especially for people who know Japanese culture a little bit. So it was a bit fun to kind of do my versions of them. But also it's from the perspective of travelers, you know, of a Western traveler. So I'm not trying to like, you know, claim that I'm an expert in a lot of this stuff. And that's sort of the perspective of the story. So I think it worked out nicely. So we kind of worked on the project or worked on the story. They really liked the ideas. I was able to choose the topics, which was really cool. And they had a few things were like, also add this and this, because we know kids like these things. I'm like, totally. Then I would basically write a script. This was a bit different too, because I kind of had a hard page limit. So I actually had to do sort of a layout with no art, just saying like, this page is story, these 2 pages are our topic. And we did some moving around, but it worked out. And then then I had to just write into that, write in that page format, which was a bit tricky. I'm used to having a little bit more space for the narrative. But it was actually a good challenge because it allowed me or it forced me to kind of like be a bit snappier, be a bit quicker with my humor, because I'm very much try to make this super fun and very silly and very goofy. And yeah, so it was a bit of a challenge, but it worked out really nicely. It was something that I think I probably would have had a harder time doing this if it was like 15 years ago when I was starting out.
Yeah. I'm curious, as a teacher, do your kids know that Mr. Lux is also a graphic novelist?
They do. I teach comic class, so
Okay.
they know that that's my whole thing. The fun part about that is that I'm teaching them stuff, even though they're for little kids. They're ages between 5 and 10, but I'm teaching them stuff that is essentially how a professional does their work. So, you know, like with my comic, after we come up with our story, we do a thing called thumbnails. Thumbnails are like a very squiggly, rough version of the entire comic, you know, all drawn out, but with like stick figures. That's a way to kind of figure out the flow of the story, the placement of the word balloons, so it makes sense, you know, it's clear, you know, it leads to the next panel, the next page. I can also work out some designs that way. And then after that, it's doing the finished art, which I start with pencils. I've recently been inking digitally, which is sort of new for me, and I'm really pleased how it came out. I used to ink with a brush, it was good, but it was hard on your hand after a while. As you're getting older, you need to think of ways to make sure I can still do this, you know, over the next few decades.
Yeah.
And it worked out quite well. And then coloring is also in computer. And yeah, it's basically it. And it's not too different than what I teach my kids and my students, you know, other than I've been doing it for so long, I'm pretty good at it. So.
Yeah. You know, I supported my son, and I've talked about this on the podcast a lot, but like I said before, my son really loved anime and manga and graphic novels. And I supported that, and by, you know, buying it for him and bring him to the comic shop. And we went to, I think, 4 or 5 different comic shops on Free Comic Day every year. And, but I didn't appreciate that what he was consuming was literature, was reading. And, you know, so wouldn't directly disparage the graphic material, but I would go into his room every once in a while and just say, dude, please, can you please read a book without a picture? Just one, just humor me. And I mention that often here because I don't want parents to make the same mistake I made. I mean, when you're reading a graphic novel, you are reading stories. It's not like the Peanuts or the Archie comics, although even Archie comics have stories with them. It's especially something like My Journey to Japan. There's a lot of story there, and so kids are reading when they're reading graphic novels.
Yeah, 100%. It's and a lot of people say that it actually can really engage different parts of your brain that even a prose book really can't, because you have to, there's a different kind of literacy with comics too, and kids pick it up really quickly because it's not like just reading the letters. You're reading the letters, you're seeing the characters, you're seeing the action, you're seeing the composition. In a lot of ways, it can really fire different parts of the imagination and parts of the brain of the reading experience, because it's like it's just they're kind of, I mean, they're engaged in a way with not just the reading part, I guess, of the brain, but the visual part is what I'm getting at.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me, when you're coming up with these stories, what comes first, the words or the images? Are you thinking out the story with images, or is it just words right from the start?
Well, I usually start by doing some sketching before I do anything. When I'm thinking of my idea for a story or of a scene, I'll be doing sketching, figuring out my character designs. I'm a very visual storyteller, so I tend to like to, if I have the time, I don't always have the time, but if I can, I like to do some illustrations of scenes that I think are interesting, or just ideas of interactions, perhaps, of some of the characters. It allows me to kind of like start the world building process and start to kind of like just get that mood, that kind of feel. It's almost like a mood board, but I'm doing the art myself. I like to actually think about I don't know if you've ever seen any of the Studio Ghibli, Miyazaki's, like, I guess you would call them like, not as storyboards, but it's like before he comes up with the story, he does a lot of art. Uh-huh. And it's similar to what I'm describing. And they put out some books of just his watercolor art that's like before he writes the story of just his different movies, and they're just gorgeous. And you see things that are different than the movie because he's working out his ideas, but you just have this very nice feel for what he's trying to get at. So I like to do that. I've done that for years, again, when I can. But then when I'm ready to start writing, I actually will do like a long paragraph of the story. So it takes my nebulous ideas and just makes it real. It makes me make decisions. So I'll be like, okay, I have this general idea of what I wanted to do, but what is it? So even just doing that paragraph makes me make decisions. When I'm ready, I can just write the script. And I actually do write the script like it's a play, like it's like a regular play. I don't even do the page like, this is going to be, panel 1, page, whatever. With this particular book, My Journey to Japan, I had to think about that a bit more since we had a kind of a tight format. But even for this, I'm like, I know I got 3 pages here. I'm just going to try to do what I can and then tighten it if I have to. And once I write the script, I then usually do the thumbnailing. And that's when I'll just print it out and I'll be, fitting everything into the pages, thinking of things like I want to end the scene on, before I turn the page, if I can. I like to, it's always nice if you can control that sort of thing, where if you can start a new scene with a page turn, because you physically are taking a couple extra seconds, and it's almost like resets your brain, so you kind of know to expect the next day or something like that. Or making sure like a joke doesn't get cut in half, like there might be a quick joke that really wouldn't be great to do a page turn on. Sure. So a lot of negotiations for the storytelling, and I'm trying to be very mindful of that as much as I can. Yeah. And then sometimes with the thumbnailing phase, I will change stuff because that's like kind of the final draft. I'll be like, okay, this dialogue is way too long and doesn't even fit in this panel very well, so I'll trim it down. Or I'll be like, this was not necessary, cut that out. Or this needs a little bit more here, or this and that. So that's like the final written draft is actually those thumbnails.
Yeah. Hey, do you have any advice for parents who have kids that are really interested in not only reading graphic novels, but also might be interested in creating them? Any advice that parents can use to encourage that?
Oh, definitely. Well, always encourage reading. This, like you were saying, reading is reading. If a kid only wants to read comics, please let them. At least they're reading. I was not a good reader growing up, but I was very lucky. My mother loved reading and was okay with comics. She grew up with comics. She was just happy I was reading. So, and creativity can come from many places, but I would say just encourage them to draw, encourage them. There are a lot of books out nowadays that actually teaches you like the fundamentals of comics. I think Raina Telgemeier has a new book out that's about that. There's a lot though. There are ones specifically for manga. There's a lot more than like when I was young when it comes to actually telling you about the process of making comics. Mm-hmm. There are classes, but those aren't necessary. I think it's just they need to want to say something.
Yeah.
They want to tell a story. I would even say, like, if you're interested in doing comics, like, maybe do a 1-page comic with one panel and be like about your day, or what was the most interesting thing that happened to you this week? Do a 1-page comic about that. And
Great.
This encouragement is kind of like where is the base thing. Is just if they are interested in art and they're interested in comics, just keep that going. The support means the world. A parent's support means the absolute world.
Absolutely. Hey, Matthew, tell us where we can go to find out more about my journey to Japan, escape to Yokai Mountain, and find out more about you.
Oh, you can go to the Tuttle website. They have a page on my journey to Japan, escape to Yokai Mountain. Tuttle is the name of the publisher. They are a wonderful publisher that does a lot of really interesting books about Asian culture and Japanese culture in particular. I do have a website. It's just mattlux.com. I also am on Instagram where I don't post as often, but I will be posting about the book. I'm going to do some nice, hopefully behind the scenes sort of things as we get closer to the release date, which is April 14th, I believe. So it's coming up. And yeah, I'm very excited. This was a dream project to work on. I was able to draw things that I've always wanted to draw. I took inspiration for the characters and the energy of the book, also for some of my students, or just the general, very upbeatness and silliness. And I definitely wanted to kind of like put that into more of my work because that's what I learned the most. I learned most from starting to teach. And yeah, it's you can basically, if you're interested, you can get it anywhere. It's basically, you can order it on almost anything online. And yeah, I encourage you, if you have a kid, especially if you have a kid who's interested in Japanese culture, even if they're just interested in something funny, because I definitely poured a lot of humor into there. There's a lot of silly interactions with like cat monsters. There's big, buff oni creatures who are like red, devilish kind of creatures who absolutely love kawaii culture. There are very fun, goofy interactions with some of the different yokais. But it was a blast to work on, and I'm very proud of it.
Excellent. We've had a great time speaking to the author and illustrator of My Journey to Japan, Escape to Yokai Mountain. Our guest has been Matthew Lux. Hey, Matthew, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. If this episode made you smile or gave you something to think about, please consider sharing a link to the show with someone you love. Leave a 5-star review and, of course, subscribe to the show wherever you find your favorite shows. Love for you to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids. at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on X. We have a great YouTube channel, youtube.com/Reading With Your Kids. And our website, it's readingwithyourkids.com. We want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our guest, coming to us all the way from Stockholm in Sweden, Linda Ravin Lodding. Please be sure to check out It Started With a Book Band. And we also want to thank our friend from Connecticut, Matthew Lux. Please be sure to check out my journey to Japan, Escape to Yokai Mountain. I want to thank my team, Chris Doherty, Jackson Satalara. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support and love she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better, more empathetic, more caring place. And you do that every single time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.